Hi, this is Kevin Trainer, and I'd like to welcome you to my lecture on Chapter 2 from the Schwalbe text. Chapter 2 has the title, The Project Management and Information Technology Context. Now, I'm recording the lecture here for my Project Management for LIS class at Illinois, the newly renamed School of Information Sciences. So, in addition to talking about information technology context, I also want to talk about library and information science context as well, even though it might not be in the slides or in the textbook. So, please bear with me while I do that. So, when we're talking about context, then we want to think in context. And the first idea we have within the chapter is how to think about our project inside of some bigger context, okay? Because we're going to go out on a limb here and say that if we try to run our project in isolation, we're going to get suboptimal results. Okay, so projects must operate in a broad organizational environment. Project managers need to use systems thinking. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, we mean taking a holistic view of carrying out projects within the context of an organization. And I think it would probably best to say that we don't want to optimize things for just our project. We want to optimize things for our organization. So we don't want everybody on every project trying to just get the best for their project. And then as a result, we get suboptimal performance for our organization as a whole. Okay? The other thing we want to talk about is that we need the support of senior management in order to have our project succeed. And all of the projects succeed for that matter. So what does it mean to take a systems approach to project management? Well, this kind of idea emerged in the 1950s to describe a more analytical approach to management and problem solving. There are three parts: systems philosophy, systems analysis, and systems management. So systems philosophy is an overall model for thinking about things as systems, and that's pretty pervasive in our thinking and speech here in the early 21st century. Systems analysis is a problem-solving approach, and I teach a course in systems analysis and invite you all to join. In systems management, in that practice, we address business, technological, and organizational issues before making changes to systems. So we want to do things in a holistically beneficial way. Okay, now, one of the models that is put forward by Schwalbe in our text is this three-sphere model for systems management. And that's to say, just because we're managing a systems project, it doesn't mean we only have on a technology hat. Okay, that to really do a good job of this, we have to wear multiple hats as the PM. So we need a technology hat, a business hat, and an organization hat. And what would we think about when we're talking about each of those things? Now, this is I think we're talking about a project for a college or university to replace some of the hardware, okay? So what are we thinking about in our technology role? Should the tablets be based on Apple, Microsoft, Android, etc. What applications are required? What will the hardware specifications be? Things that are very much technology oriented. Okay, well, we're going to want to capture the business thoughts as well. So put on our business hat. What will the tablet project cost the college? What will it cost the students? What will the support costs be? How is it going to impact enrollment? So in that way, we're thinking about what's the net cost of this, and then put on our organizational hat. Will the tablet project affect all students, just traditional students, only certain majors? How will the project affect students who already have tablets or laptops, etc.? Okay, so we don't want to be thinking, as a project manager, we don't want to be thinking just one way. We want to be thinking in a holistic way. One way to do that is to identify these three spheres: technology, business, and organizational, and use those to make sure we've got sufficiently broad thinking on, well, whatever the issues may be. Here's another framework for this, and I say framework in a literal sense because it is a framework. Some theorists talk about there being more than one frame in which you can approach your thinking and analysis about a particular undertaking. They talk about the structural frame, the political frame, the human resources frame, and the symbolic frame. So when you're looking at things through a structural frame, you're looking at roles and responsibilities, coordination and control. When you're doing that, you might want to be looking at things like organization charts. In the political frame, you might see the world as coalitions composed of varied individuals and interest groups, and you might be wanting to focus in on things like conflict and power. In the human resources frame, we might be wanting to focus in on providing harmony between the needs of the organization and the needs of people. And in the symbolic frame, we might want to focus in on the symbols and meanings related to the events that surround whatever we're concerned with. So culture, language, tradition, and image are all parts of this frame. Now, we're not going to claim that one frame is the right frame and the other frames are the wrong frames. We're rather more agnostic about this. We're saying, again, here are four perspectives that are all important for the organization. And when we're thinking about projects, we do well to take these four frames to make sure that we cover them, to make sure that we have sufficiently broad and holistic thinking. I don't really like this slide, so we're going to skip it. Okay, so it's important for you as a project manager to kind of understand the organizational aspects of the environment that you're in and how they're going to affect you and your role as a PM. And the scholars in this area have identified three types of organization structures that are possible, okay, and you might be in one or the other. So there are functional organizations in which functional managers report to the CEO, largely hierarchical. There are project organizations in which at the very top, program managers report to the CEO. And then there are matrix organization, which is an attempt to combine the two previous one. It's a middle ground between functional and project structured. So people in the organization often report to two or more bosses. If you have a matrix, okay, what we try to do is we try to say, is it closer net to a functional organization or to a project or organization? So if it's closer to a functional organization, we call that a weak matrix. If it's closer to a project organization, we call that a strong matrix. And if it's exactly in the middle, we call that a balanced matrix. Now, we use strong and weak because, of course, we're project people. So we think an organization structure in which projects and project managers have a lot of power is beneficial. So we consider that to be strong. So here are pictures of three organization charts. The first is for a functional organization, the traditional sort of organization structure. The middle one is for a project organization. And then the one on the bottom would be a typical matrix organization. And how would we tell if the one on the bottom was weak or balanced or strong? Well, it would really depend upon the way decisions got made in our organization. So from this picture, you can't tell. Okay. So here's a very interesting chart on slide 9 that talks about characteristics of a project and how they might be different in functional, project, and the three flavors of matrix organization. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire table in the lecture here, but I just want to pick, say, two things and talk through. So how strong is a project manager's authority? Well, in a functional organization, it's very low. In a project organization, it's high to nearly total. And then as we move from weak through balance and on to strong matrix, the project manager's authority gets higher and higher. Let's look at the one in the middle. Who controls the budget? Okay. So in a functional organization, the budget is controlled by a functional manager, not the project manager at all. In a project organization, the budget would be controlled by the project manager. And then as we move across the matrix, if it's weak, it's controlled by the functional. If it's strong, it's controlled by the PM. And if it's balanced, well, they share responsibility. It's mixed. So you're kind of in the organization that you're in, okay? And I'm not going to go out and claim that one organization structure is good and another one is bad, because we don't really know that to be true, okay? But I will say that the characteristics of different kinds of organizational structures are different, and it's very helpful to look in the kind of organization structure that you're in so that you can kind of understand the expectations. And I find this to be where this kind of thinking is most helpful to the PM. Now we're going to talk about organizational culture. So this is a phrase that you hear used quite a bit, And here's what we mean by here. Organizational culture is a set of shared assumptions, values, and behaviors that characterize the functioning of an organization. Many experts believe the underlying causes of many companies' problems and successes, on the other hand, are not the structure or staff, but the culture. Okay, and so what are the implications here? I think the implication here is that maybe not all the differences from organization to organization are down on paper, right? You can't easily quantify them. You have to go and see what people believe and how they act and how they interrelate with each other. And that has a strong impact on life in that organization. So here's 10 characteristics of organizational culture. Okay, so here are things that might be different from organization to organization. Member identity, group emphasis, people focus, unit integration, control, risk tolerance, reward criteria, conflict tolerance, means to ends orientation, and open systems focus. Project work is going to be most successful in organizational cultures where the items that have the asterisks are strong and high, and other items are balanced. Okay, so if we have strong or high member identity, group emphasis, unit integration, risk tolerance, reward criteria, conflict tolerance, and open systems focus, looks like we have a good chance. Now, one of the important things about our projects is that we are performing our projects for stakeholders. You can really talk about stakeholders in a kind of exclusive or inclusive way, okay? In its most exclusive way, it's the people who are very closely associated with your project. It's the sponsor, the people who work for the sponsor. If it's an IT project that's going to create a system, it's the users of that system. It's the people on the project team who are going to gather the requirements for that system and design it and build it and test it and install it and maintain it over time. So those are the close-in stakeholders. We do have a wider sense of the word when we start to include people affected by the system or people just in favor, the system, I mean the project, people who are going to be affected by the project either positively or negatively, even if they're not in the prior group, and or people who are either for or against the project, regardless of how much it's really their business. Okay? So project managers should take the time to identify, understand, and manage relationships with all project stakeholders, even the opponents of the project. We don't want to leave them alone. Okay? We want to make sure that they know what we want them to know. Using the 4 frames of organizations can help meet stakeholder needs and expectations. So again, stakeholder needs and expectations are complex. So we need a broad framework of thinking to make sure that we're anticipating all their needs and expectations. Senior executives and top management are very important stakeholders. They're special stakeholders because they pay our bills, they're our bosses or our clients, okay? And without their cooperation, nothing good happens, okay? So sometimes they're due a little bit more attention than other stakeholders, not because they're great people in terms of how they're going to be analyzed in the history of the world, but because of the practicalities that they They are either going to make this thing go for us, or they're going to decide to not make it go. And we have a whole chapter 13, which we're going to get to soon because we're doing it out of order, on project stakeholder management. Important stuff. So we talked about the top management and how important they are, and now we're going to emphasize that even further. So people in top management positions in our organizations are stakeholders in our projects. A very important factor in helping PMs successfully lead projects is the level of commitment and support they receive from top management. How do we know that? We asked people. We said, what were the most important things that either helped or hurt your project? And this tends to come out as number 1 or 2, no matter who's doing the asking. Without top management commitment, many projects will fail. Some projects have a senior manager called a champion who acts as a key proponent for the project. This means that senior managers who are, say, sponsors of a project can do a lot of things. They can provide guidance. They can provide funding. They can generate enthusiasm. They can get the organization behind your project or not. Okay, so these are typically people who have either a lot of power and or a lot of influence. So we want to treat them particularly well. How can they help us? Well, they can provide us or not with adequate resources. They can approve unique project needs in a timely manner. That means that they might give us permission to not follow all the rules. That's unique project needs is kind of a tame way to say, allow us to break the rules. Getting cooperation from other parts of the organization, mentoring and coaching and helping on leadership issues. So we can't overestimate the importance of our top management stakeholders. So how do organizations typically make top IT decisions? So this kind of process of making decisions about what projects are going to go forward and which are not, and what resources they're going to get and all the kinds of, this is often referred to as IT governance. So it addresses the authority and control for key IT activities in organizations, including infrastructure, use of resources, and project management. A lack of IT governance can be dangerous, as evidenced by the 3 well-publicized IT project failures in Australia: Sydney Water's Customer Relationship Management System, the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology's Academic Management System, and OneTel's billing system. And if you want to read some more about these things, they're in the book. They're in the Schwalbe text. Okay, now, so this IT governance idea is really part of the professionalization of IT practice. Now, we have professionalized a lot of things. Certainly people in the legal department think that the law is a profession, and people in the accounting department, the accounting and finance department, think that they're part of professions. We saw in the last of the chapters that project management people should like to think that they're part of a profession, and IT people would too. So the IT people would like to think that there's some best practices in how we make decisions and how we govern the activities within the IT organization. and this is called IT governance, at least when we do it well. Slide 16 is pretty self-serving. There's been a tension in certainly business organization and also higher education, really all kinds of organization. There's been a tension between IT people and non-IT people, okay? And the tension really centered around who's going to be in control and who's going to be accountable to whom. And the IT people have wanted for a long time to have sort of a seat at the table. So for there to be people talk about the C jobs, the chief financial officer, the chief marketing officer, the chief executive officer, where they'd like us to have a chief information officer. The real issue here is, does IT get respect? So in an organization where IT gets very little respect, either because of history in the organization or just prejudices, it's hard for IT projects to succeed, okay? The last of the bullets on the slide, assigning 9 IT people to IT projects, it's a sign of respect, right? So the idea that if it's an IT project, that it will be managed and led by IT people and it will have other stakeholders as participants, is seen as a good thing, okay? So kind of the takeaway here is organizations in which IT is a whipping boy are organizations in which it's hard to have a successful IT project. And there will be organizations where IT has a sort of healthy place at the table, and maybe these give us the best opportunity to participate in successful IT projects. The need for standards. Standards and guidelines help project managers be more effective, okay? Now, standards and guidelines and infrastructure are sort of a double-edged sword, okay? To the extent that your organization has a set of standards and guidelines and infrastructure, well, it might be rigid. So there may be things that you'd like to try on your project that there's a lot of resistance to. Okay, so completely sort of over-engineered organizations that have a lot of very rigid standards can be problematic sometimes. But an even bigger problem is trying to manage a project in an organization that has no standards for managing projects. There's no common language with respect to managing projects, and there's no infrastructure. So in those organizations, the project manager is expected to invent everything from scratch, and it's very difficult to do. What could senior management do to foster a good environment in this respect? Well, they could encourage the use of standard forms and software for managing projects. I would call those infrastructures. Infrastructure, the development and use of guidelines for writing project plans and providing status information, that's part of infrastructure. And the creation of a project management office or center of excellence. Again, if these people are the project management angels, I'm all for it. If they're the rat squad, maybe not money well spent. Okay, So, let's just take a pause here and say, in what we've talked about so far, it's been IT, IT, IT. What about library and information science? How's that the same, or is that different? And I would say that there are some similarities and there are some differences. Some of the similarities are this. There's quite a few information-oriented projects in library and information science. If they don't have an IT component, they still are information organization kinds of projects. As such, they're equally intangible. They're sometimes hard to predict, hard to plan for, hard to judge how far done they are, all those kinds of things. So a lot of the issues that follow around IT projects can follow around LAS projects. In terms of the political and cultural climate, I think that library and information science projects tend to do well because they tend to happen inside of a professional organization in which the people in charge are committed to the value of library and information science. So it's less likely that you're going to be working on a project for part of the organization that is, as happens in IT from time to time, the red-headed stepchild. Okay, so that's good. Bad thing, a harder thing, is that a lot of my students report that the projects they do in libraries in particular, they're now not allocated to full-time. They are doing this with just a small percentage of their time. And so to a certain extent, projects are what they're expected to do in their quote-unquote spare time. Okay, so you might not always get the resources that you might get in a more traditional IT project. Okay, library and information science organizations are often owned by the government. Okay, sometimes it's harder to make decisions there. You need levels of approval or for procurement and things that perhaps you wouldn't get if you were doing an IT project for manufacturing or a retailing firm. So there might be some bureaucracy barriers that you would have to put up with that you might not have to put up with in the private sector. Okay, so those are things to concern yourself with. On the other hand, in a lot of library organizations in particular, there's a lot of value on collaboration and cooperation to an even greater extent than it seems to be true in the private sector. So that really bodes well for collaborative projects. So there's some things that are the same, some things that are going to be easier, some things that are going to be harder. And it's just going to be important for you to get the lay of the land and where you are and sort of assess where you are. So let's get back to the systems aspect of this, okay? So if in fact we are working on a project that is going to produce a system, then it's important for us to get up to speed on how people do those kinds of projects. Okay, we might have some idea how people do a physical construction project. Why? Because we watch a lot of buildings go up, or we watch a lot of roads being built. Okay, and they're pretty physical. I mean, you can kind of watch them being done. You kind of get some idea of what they do before they do something else and all that kind of stuff. these systems projects are less visible, less inspectable. So it's important for us to concentrate on them a bit. Okay? So typically, we have a concept of there being a project life cycle. Okay? So wherever you work, whatever organization you work in, you typically have a concept of, we do these phases for a systems development project. We do first phase, then the second phase, then the third, then the fourth, and then we're done. Okay? So not everybody defines the phases the same way. Okay? But that's okay, because there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of agreement. The good news is that there's a lot of agreement. The bad news is that there's some disagreement. Okay? So a project life cycle is a collection of phases of work on a project that define what work will be performed in each phase, what deliverables will be produced and when, who's involved in each phase, and how management will control and approve work produced in each phase. And by a deliverable, we mean one of two things. Either the product or service that is the genuine result of the project, or some kind of a document or plan or specification that's going to help us get to that end. Okay, so we have end deliverables, which are the product and service or service themselves, and then we have intermediate deliverables that are plans, specifications, reports, that kind of stuff. So let's talk about project life cycle things. So in the early phases of a project life cycle, the needs for resources are usually the lowest because we're doing planning and thinking. The level of uncertainty or the risk is the highest because we haven't fully committed to doing it one way or the other. Project stakeholders have the greatest opportunity to influence the project because we're still steering things. In the middle phases of the project life cycle, the certainty of completing a project improves. Okay, more resources are going to be needed. And in the final phase of the project life cycle, we focus on ensuring that the project requirements were met and the sponsor approves the completion of the project, hopefully, or not, in which case we have a bad outcome. So here's a on slide 20, here's a group of project lifecycle phases that we're not going to say that everybody uses, but it's a rational grouping, okay? So the phases themselves start out with a concept phase, then a development phase, then an implementation phase, then a closeout phase. So you're going to say, well, what comes out of each of them? Well, in the concept, we do a document called the business case, a preliminary cost estimate, two-level work breakdown structure. We'll learn what that is over the course. Let's go over look at implementation, execution of work packages, definitive cost estimate, performance reports. So these are things phase by phase, the unique things that are being thrown off by the project. The other thing that they've done here is that they've taken these four phases and they've divided them into two meta phases, project feasibility and project acquisition. Here's where you won't see a lot of people using those exact phrases. So you might see a number of people using concept, development, implementation, and closeout, but very few would be using project feasibility and project acquisition. Uh, so in addition to our project having a life cycle, you have to remember that every project is going to lead to some product or service. So when we say product, what we, when you're hearing it here, product or service. So the products that come out of projects have a life cycle themselves. So the systems development life cycle is a framework for describing the phases involved in developing and maintaining information systems. Systems development projects can follow one of two families of approaches, okay? The traditional approach is called the predictive life cycle, and the more the newer and say the trendier sort of approach would be an approach that we would call adaptive software development. Now, people don't really call things predictive life cycles or adaptive software development. These are the kind of things that people who write textbooks say. The most popular predictive approach is commonly referred to as the waterfall method. And we'll probably be talking about that in a slide or two. The most common adaptive approach is called Agile project management. And we'll be talking about that in another couple of slides as well. Okay? The predictive approach, including the waterfall approach, is really based on the belief that the scope of a project can be clearly articulated at the very beginning, and the schedule and cost can be predicted. Okay, so it has high aspiration for what's knowable, what's plannable at the very beginning of the project. Adaptive software development approaches don't have such high aspirations about the knowability and the plannability of things. They're saying that requirements for systems cannot always be clearly expressed. Projects are mission-driven and component-based, using time-based cycles to meet target dates. So these are two competing families of approaches to organizing and managing projects. They are hard at work in competition with each other in the field today. It's important for you to know them both. There's no right one or wrong one, which is why you ought to know about both. Okay, and again, the most popular predictive approach is typically referred to as the waterfall approach, and the most popular adaptive approach is commonly referred to as Agile project management. Okay, predictive life cycle models, the first group. The waterfall model has well-defined linear stages of systems development and support. The spiral model shows that software is developed using an iterative or spiral approach rather than a linear approach. So it's a little more sophisticated than the waterfall, but still predictive. Incremental build model provides for progressive development of operational software. Prototyping model used for developing prototypes to clarify user requirements. And the rapid application development model used to produce systems quickly without sacrificing quality. So what's interesting is we started with the waterfall model. Okay, let's look ahead here. Do I have the waterfall? Yeah. Okay, on slide 23 we can see the waterfall. So we had this idea, first we're going to do analysis, then we're going to do design, then we're going to do construction, then we're going to do testing, then we're going to do support. A lot of times when you see the waterfall method, it's not squeezed into the left half of a slide. So you see that we've done in some versions of it, we've done all of analysis before we do design. We do all of design before we do construction, okay? Here, these things seem to overlap a bit, okay? So the original idea was no overlap. So we do, we'd analyze the situation and come up with the requirements, and we get those signed off, and then we'd move in, we do the design and get that signed off, and do the construction and get that signed off. Okay, so now there have been complaints about this kind of approach in that it's a lot of times it's only in the next phase of your work that you really start to understand the limits of the decisions that you made in the prior phase. So this idea that we would do it one phase and then stop and never return to that activity, a lot of people were saying that that was a little bit short-sighted, especially for things that we don't understand well. Okay? That started to lead to things like the spiral model, where we had this idea, let's do analysis, design, implementation, and testing on increasingly big portions of the project and kind of discover as we go. Okay? And just to back up, so what has happened is that the spiral, the incremental build, the prototyping, and rapid application development have all been attempts to modify that highly structured waterfall approach in order to repair its shortcomings. Okay? Now, where do we go from this? The competing idea is that there are a group of people who came up with the idea, wait a minute, maybe this whole idea about software development, maybe we ought to have a different philosophical approach. And a group of people got together and they agreed on this thing they call the Agile manifesto, which we'll see before the chapter's out. And it's kind of newfangled approach to software development and managing software projects, okay? It has a lot of differences from the original waterfall approach, okay? One of the differences is just in the claim of how much we can know and plan for in the beginning of a project, okay? What is interesting is it really borrows from a lot of the things that the authors have lumped into the predictive side. So if we go back to 2 slides, the spiral model, the incremental build, the prototyping approach, rapid application development, all of these things kind of are previews of things that we're going to see in Agile software development. Okay, so the dividing line between predictive and adaptive is not so sharp as a lot of people would have you believe. And the people who have come up with Agile software development have not like invented it out of thin air, right? It really is maybe a natural kind of next step or a couple of steps away from things that were evolving in the original predictive life cycle approach. Okay? Now, because the proponents came out with a manifesto and declared that they were different, well, we see that as kind of a chasm that can't be crossed. But there's a greater continuity amongst all these approaches than certainly the Agile people would have you believe. So let's go back and look at Agile again. Agile software development has become popular to describe new approaches that focus on close collaboration between programming teams and business experts. See the last section of the chapter for more information on Agile. So we're going to get to it in a little bit. In chapter 3. So we're going to talk more about Agile in chapter 3. The importance of project phases in management reviews. So projects successfully pass through each of the project phases in order to continue on to the next. Management reviews, also called phase exits or kill points, should occur after each phase to evaluate the project's progress, likely success, and continued compatibility with organizational goals. So this means in this kind of approach, the organization gives the project manager and the project team the authority to do the next increment of work in a traditional predictive waterfall kind of project. That's probably a phase, right? That's what they were calling the concept phase or the design phase or the development phase, okay? And we're going to reevaluate the project when we get to the end of the phase. In the Agile software world, where we have these things called sprints, we probably get the okay to do things a sprint at a time, depending on how long our sprints are. They're typically 2 weeks to 2 months long. We might be given the okay to do the next so many sprints, okay? And then we'll reevaluate. At any point, management is going to reserve the right to look at the project and to decide, are we going to go further or not? Well, remember back to the chapter 1 lecture when I said we were making a bunch of claims for the benefits of formal project management, and it was a long list of really attractive things. And I said, these are all things that we can get and that we have some cost, and that I'd talk about the cost later. Well, we've really come to the cost, okay? Because all the work that we do, all the things that we're learning here in the course have some incremental cost. You know, we're thinking more, we're tracking things more, we're trying to be more thoughtful. All that's going to take some kind of incremental effort. So how are we going to pay for that? We're going to pay for that by not getting out of control, okay? So in projects that are informally managed, we don't have these phase exits or kill points, okay? We just keep going. And we keep going until people just run out of money, run out of time, run out of patience, run out of goodwill. And often when you look at those projects, you'll look back and say, you know, we could have known significantly earlier if we had kept a tighter rein on the project, and at the end of every phase or every sprint or iteration, if we had looked, okay, does it make sense to continue on? We probably would have stopped this a year ago, okay? So how do we pay for all the benefits that we get from this formal project management? By taking the care to not continue projects past the point where they should be stopped, right? Now, why should we stop a project? Because we don't like the people on it? Well, I hope not. Because we don't like the project? Well, I hope not too. But a lot of times we have started on a project and the world has changed, okay? And it changes in a couple of ways. Typically we discover things we didn't know before, okay? One of the things that we discover is how much work is implicit in what we're trying to achieve. It typically turns out to be more than we thought, okay? Another thing that changes is the requirements that are coming from the environment that our organization operates in. They change over time. Okay, so as time goes by, what was important half a year ago or a year ago perhaps is not so important anymore. Perhaps some big bad thing has happened and we're on to bigger problems. Okay, and maybe our capabilities are not as great as we thought. Okay, our ability to understand the requirements, our ability to propose a solution and to build that and to test it and to install it and to manage it. Perhaps we realize now that we don't have the capability we thought we had a year ago. We're more realistic. Those things can all lead to a decision at the end of a phase or sprint or iteration to stop. And the claim for formal project management is simply this: the benefits that we would all like to get can be more than paid for by not continuing to do projects past the point where we should stop them. Okay, so there's a wastage in continuing on projects past a certain rational point, and that cost is greater than the cost of creating all the benefits that we're looking to get. And I don't know that anybody's actually done research to prove it, but sort of anecdotally, most people believe this to be true. Okay, that simply by being thoughtful and purposeful about our planning and conducting the project and keeping our eye on, is it right to continue past this point, we can save enough from the bad that we don't do to finance all the good that we want to get done, and then have a little bit to save. I have to leave this slide in because there's a phrase in it that I really like. And it kind of says the same thing that I just said. So somebody says, the real improvement I saw was in our ability, in the words of Thomas Edison, to know when to stop beating a dead horse. Edison's key to success was that he failed fairly often, but as he said, he could recognize a dead horse before it started to smell. In information technology, we ride dead horses, failing projects, a long time before we give up. But what we are seeing now is that we're able to get off them, able to reduce the cost overrun and time overrun. And that's where the major impact came on our success rate. So this is a much more eloquent expression of what I just shared with you, and it has the benefit of smelly horses and Thomas Edison to boot. So how do we make sure that we do this? Well, in some organizations, they'll have something like an executive steering committee. We generally have this idea of some kind of shared responsibility to keep people from getting too close to the decisions. One of the reasons we stick with the dead horses so long is that people don't want to give up on their own horse. So some kind of committee, oversight, those kinds of organizations tend to temper people's enthusiasm and have them be more realistic sooner. But that's how we believe that we can pay for formal project management. Okay, so a little bit more on context. IT projects can be very diverse in terms of size, complexity, etc. IT project team members can be very diverse, both technologically and culturally. IT projects use diverse technologies that change rapidly. Even within one technology area, people can be pretty highly specialized. A couple of trends in IT projects that are relevant to us are globalization, outsourcing, virtual teams, and agile project management. So let's talk about globalization. So here are the issues: the communications, trust, common work practices, and tools. Okay, so in a world where we have wider and wider groups of people working on the same project, often from all over the world, some of the diversity can be challenging. So what are the suggestions for dealing with this? Employ greater project discipline, do fewer things informally, think global but act local, keep project momentum going, use newer tools and technology. Okay, so those are all good ideas, but I just would say that we need to have our eyes open about the challenges of working not only from country to country around the globe, but we get a lot of sort of in higher education, we get people working in, say, consortia and stuff, where we have collaborations of multiple institutions. And we should know that those are going to create some challenges, and we should be prepared to deal with them. Outsourcing has to do with taking work that would traditionally have been done in an IT sense by people who would be employees of the company and farming it out to other companies, sometimes companies within the same country, and sometimes companies who are in different countries. There's definitely motivation for outsourcing that has to do with labor saving costs, or savings in labor costs. And that's the reason why outsourcing by companies who get their labor from other countries is appealing in high labor cost countries like the United States. Okay? Outsourcing companies make other arguments other than just the cost of their labor for why it makes sense to work with them. Sometimes they talk about the company who is outsourcing the work being able to give their attention to their core business and the places where they want to create competitive advantage, and to take something like IT and to give responsibility to some other organization. Sometimes they talk about economies of scale. Okay, so a really big IT outsourcing organization can potentially create economies of scale that individual companies or institutions would not be able to do. How much of that's true? Again, I don't think it's been proven. Certainly when you talk to outsourcing companies, they want to, they have a lot of anecdotes to share about why that might be true. It's definitely driven in a realistic way by differences in the cost of labor from country to country. But these are going to have impacts on projects and project managers to the extent that the work is going to be done by other organizations and other organizations in other parts of the world. Then the kind of skills that your project manager is going to need are potentially going to be different. Okay? They're going to be more involved with negotiating contracts and managing vendors than in, say, more technical and human resources kinds of pursuits. I'm going to let this global issue slide go. Virtual teams is another fairly new phenomena that is, we're all dealing with. I'm teaching this course from my office in my home. I'm recording it. My students are going to be listening to it next week. I don't have on fuzzy slippers, but at least I potentially could. And as communications technology and cost changes have shifted around, we get more people who are working with us towards whatever goal we have who are not physically located with us. And this creates a lot of opportunity, and it creates some challenges as well. We have both advantages and disadvantages. Advantages, competitiveness and responsiveness. Lowering costs, because if the cost of going into work every day or traveling to another city are high, then not doing that creates savings. Providing more expertise by making increasing the pool of people who can contribute to your project. Increasing work-life balance for people who are on the team. Certainly, yesterday I was able to take a hike for an hour at the end of the day instead of being caught in rush hour traffic. I think I'm more effective today because I got to do that yesterday. Disadvantages: isolates team members. Increasing potential for communications problems, because people who don't see each other face to face have a greater probability of misunderstanding or conflict. Reducing the ability for team members to network and transfer information informally. Increasing dependence on technology. And we have a lot more than this in the text. So virtual teams are not new. They're not going away. They have a particular set of advantages and disadvantages, and it's important for project managers to have their eye open about both sides. And of course, Agile project management is another trend that we wanted to talk about. So what is Agile project management? Well, this is the one family of approaches to managing projects that we're seeing is adaptive in between the predictive family of approaches and the adaptive family of approaches. So Agile means being able to move quickly and easily, but some people feel that project management, as they've seen it used, does not allow people to work quickly or easily. Early software development projects often used a waterfall approach. As the technology in business has become more complex, the approach was often difficult to use because the requirements were unknown or continuously changing. So you really have to kind of understand why that's important. If you're taking a predictive approach that says that you can plan everything up front, sort of implicit in that is that you know everything up front. If you're in a situation where you don't know everything up front, that you're going to discover it experientially, having a predictive waterfall approach is maybe not well suited to that set of circumstances. Agile today means using a method based on iterative and incremental development in which requirements and solutions evolve through collaboration. And I just want to point out that iterative kind of stuff and collaboration kind of stuff, there were elements of that in a number of the approaches that the authors or the author categorized under predictive. Things like the spiral approach, or things like prototyping. So whereas people would have you believe that the Agile approach to managing projects is a clear new break in insight, I tend to see it more as another point on a continuum of increasingly sophisticated ways that we think about our work and ways to manage it. Okay, so some people would have you believe that Agile approaches to managing projects are the only ones that work. And if you read the Agile books and you go to the Agile seminars, certainly you can hear people singing that tune. There are some people who are sort of equally down on Agile. Okay, and they say, well, as limited as the successes of predictive approaches like the waterfall have been, Agile is worse. It's snake oil. Now, right-thinking people like Schwalbe and I and some others would probably say you pick the horse for the course. Okay? There are some projects that are well suited to waterfall kinds of approaches, and there are some that are well suited to Agile kinds of approaches, and your job is to figure out what kind of project you have and what kind of organization you have. Okay? So this leads to this point of view here where the author of this statement is saying that Agile makes sense for some projects, but not all projects. And that's something that I can get behind. Many seasoned experts in project management warn people not to fall for the hype associated with Agile. Okay, so maybe those people are people who are the Agile haters. For example, Ward says that Agile will be seen for what it is and isn't project management. Organizations embracing Agile software and product development approaches will continue to grow while being faced with the challenge of demonstrating ROI through Agile adoption. And I think we did a little too much surgery on that quote if I'm remembering the full text of it. But I think that a rational point of view is that predictive waterfall kinds of approaches work really well for some kinds of projects, especially projects that are really well known. Okay, so we're doing something we've already done before. We're doing something we know how to do. It's just we want to do it for another group of people. Right? Well, we don't have to discover a whole lot. We have to discover some details of what it means to do for that group of people. But for the most part, predictive waterfall kind of approach will work great. There are other kinds of things that are more experiential. There are smaller projects in particular, and projects that we've never done before for people we've never worked for before that are harder to know about, harder to predict about. Perhaps we want to discover them experientially and sort of with an Agile sort of approach. So the thoughtful people these days are saying that the smaller your project, the more novel your project, the more experiential your needs, the more you probably should be taking a look at Agile sort of approaches. And the larger your project and the more tried and true what you're trying to do, the more you probably ought to stick with the waterfall approach. Okay. Of course, if you talk to the hardliners on the other on either side, they'll tell you that um, the people on the opposing side are all wet and perhaps evil. All right, next slide. Scrum is one of the specific methodologies that make up Agile approaches. Okay, according to the Scrum Alliance, which is Scrum industry group, Scrum is the leading Agile development method for completing projects with a complex, innovative scope of work. So scopes that are not well known in the beginning. The term was coined in '86 in a Harvard Business Review study that compared high-performing cross-functional teams to Scrum formations used by rugby teams. Okay, so Scrum is used for software project. It's used for other product development kinds of projects. It probably has the biggest following of all the Agile approaches. Here's the Scrum framework. Okay. We start off by creating a product backlog. So we have a list of potential features or user stories that we'd like to be able to support. We prioritize them on the basis of the values of a representative of the stakeholders, who we call the product owner, probably a sponsor kind of person. Then the project team takes a subset of all the requirements or user stories that are on the product backlog, and they decide they're going to achieve their work on this in the next sprint. Okay, and sprints here, at least according to the slide here, take from 2 to 4 weeks. And I think that's a good length for a sprint. So the project team selects a subset of requirements on the product backlog, and they decide to do them in the sprint. They commit to doing it in a fixed length of time. So sprints don't have a flexible length of time. They have a fixed length of time. So teams would say, we're going to use 2-week sprints, or we're going to use 3-week sprints, or 4-week sprints. So the job of the team is to pick a subset of the requirements that they can fit into that size, whatever it is. When I'm coaching people, I have them generally start out with 2-week sprints because they get themselves into less trouble that way. Certainly would let them go as long as, say, 4. During the sprint, we have daily team meetings, which we call a scrum, which we in which we do a lot of face-to-face coordination. So one important part of Scrum is this idea that teams should be co-located, so they should be physically together, that they should meet once a day in a coordination kind of a meeting that they call the Scrum, that they should take collective responsibility for things, and they should be very product-oriented. At the end of the sprint results in a useful product. Okay, we call it a potentially shippable product increment. Okay, now that's not always something that we could really ship and install or sell, but it's fully thought through and coded to that kind of quality level. And then when we're done with the sprint, we have a review. We do self-reflection. We do that with our product owner and amongst the team itself. And then we begin again. We look at the backlog. We pick the subset from the backlog we're going to commit to for the sprint, and then we go right into the sprint again. And we continue that until either the project gets done, or somebody calls time. Okay, and people can call time for one of two reasons. Reason one is they might say, this is good enough. This is we don't have to spend anymore. This is it. This is the system we want. Or they might say, well, we know this is not the system that we want long term, but this is all we can afford right now. If you compare the cost of continuing on further sprints and the benefits that we're going to get in the very short run, we think that we're just going to stick right here and we're going to stop. Okay, so that's the Scrum approach. It's the most popular of all of these Agile project management approaches. It's very popular with IT projects. It's very popular with other product and service development kinds of projects that are not IT related. Another methodology in the Agile family is called KanBan. And so KanBan is a technique that can be used in conjunction with Scrum. It was developed in Japan by Toyota. It uses visual cues to guide the workflow, which include things like KanBan cards that show new work, work in progress, and work completed. The PMI organization has decided it's going to be friendly to Agile. Okay, there maybe was a time when people at PMI who really grew up in this whole predictive waterfall kind of culture thought that Agile was playing fast and loose with things. But what they've been able to see is that Agile has a very big following and has brought a lot of people into project management in a formal way who were never there before, and that's been an achievement in its own right. A lot of people find Agile sort of approaches very appealing. They've got probably many fewer moving parts. Okay, so of all the tools and techniques we're going to learn about in this course, I would say that maybe a fourth of them would be advocated by Agile people. The other 3/4 are primarily advocated by more traditional waterfall people. But what the Agile people have done is that they brought a whole new group of people to PM, and they have told a story in a very appealing way. So the PMI folks welcome them, okay, and have even introduced a certification for Agile called ACP, Agile Certified Practitioner, which I want to get, haven't gotten yet. And the sort of interplay between the more traditional predictive kinds of approaches and the newer Agile kinds of approaches, there's still a tension between those two. I think that they complement each other, and they both seem to be able to coexist well in the PMI organization. And they do create a challenge for the new practitioner that you have to kind of decide which bandwagon you want to hitch yourself to. When you're really new, I think it's best just to keep your eyes and your ears open and see what you find appealing. Okay, because I think these things are all good in their own way, and I don't think that either camp, the traditional predictive waterfall camp or the newer Agile kind of camp, I think that they all have things to offer. They all have kinds of projects or considerations that they're particularly good at, And I think that keeping your eyes and ears open to all of those things over the rest of the course is the right thing to do. Having said that, I'm going to say bye until next time. Bye-bye.